Hi there guys, this is Liam from the Punks and Pubs. You're going to be listening to me in a second ramble about some shit with someone. This is an advert from the off, just to let you know, but the reason that this is an advert is not because someone's paying me, it's because I've just been happy with the service I've been provided. Merchstore.co.uk are a bunch of guys who have printed my t-shirts for me, the Punks and Pubs t-shirts. Go check them out. And they've been nothing but amazing. The reason that they've been nothing but amazing is because these guys know difficulties of getting your t-shirts printed for a reasonable price. They happen to be in bands, so they know the process of going to someone and then checking something, and then it's just a long drawn out process. But these guys have made it really simple for me, and the price has been amazing, and the quality of the t-shirts are great. So go and check them out, merchstore.co.uk. I can't make you do it, but I would definitely recommend that you do it. There you go. I'm off. Here's the intro music. I'll talk to you in a second.
Oi, you punks, go on my pub.
And welcome to the Punks in Pubs podcast. My name is Liam Bird and I hope you are well. Happy New Year. Can we still say that? I mean, it's the 16th of January when I'm recording this. At what point do you stop saying Happy New Year? I'm going to stick with the 31st. That's when I'm going to stop saying Happy New Year. After the 1st, when it's the 1st of February, if you come up to me and say Happy New Year, I'm going to spit in your face and call you a cunt. Because the year would have already gone shit by then. You already have a good idea of how well or how bad your year is going to go by the 31st of January. So don't test it. Just don't. 1st of February, cut off. There you go. Liam has spoken. Don't say Happy New Year after that date. It would seem a lot of you enjoyed the last episode. Thank you. With Jeff from the 100 Club. Got so many positive messages on social media. It was actually a bit weird. Everyone loves a good compliment, including myself. I've got an ego like everyone else. If you did enjoy last week's episode, then why don't you do something positive and go and rate and review on iTunes or whatever podcast streaming service you use. If you want to support the podcast financially, go pick up a t-shirt. They're now being sold on Etsy. Just type in Punks in Pubs podcast in the search engine and you will find the t-shirts. All money made go back into the podcast, paying for travel, new equipment, and such. So that's all the information on how you can support the podcast. Let me tell you what I give to you for your support. Episode 31 is me sat in Royal George Bar in Soho, London, talking to the director Jenn Wexler, producer Heather Buckley, and for a short amount of time, actor Chloe Levine. Together they created the award-winning new horror movie, The Ranger. So Jen, Heather and Chloe were over for FrightFest in London around autumn 2018. So we had a good chat about the movie. If you don't know what the movie The Ranger is, let me give you a quick synopsis of the movie. I'll try it in my best horror movie voice. Here we go. Teen punks on the run from the cops. You know what? Scrap that. I'm not doing that. That just sounds fucking weird. Teen punks on the run from the cops and hiding out in the woods face off against local authority, an unhinged park ranger with an axe to grind. That was shit, so what I'm going to do is actually play you the trailer. This trailer is actually made for it to be watched on YouTube, but I actually think it comes across quite well in audio, so here we go. Here's the trailer.
About what happened. We did what we could. No one will know. You're a wolf, Chelsea. Don't you ever forget that. And don't you ever forget me.
Welcome to the happiest night of your life. Thanks, yo, we out. Stabbing a cop is serious time. Chelsea's got a place in the woods.
My uncle died there. You really want to be a part of this?
Like classic outlaws. Yo, Chelsea, that guy bothering you?
The mountain's closed.
It's Chelsea's mountain. She's got a house up there. Chelsea, tell him.
How about that? Yo,
It actually exists. Cheers to being alive.
you remember me?
It's all kind of a blur.
How'd you end up with a crowd like that?
Show me a beer.
Girl I remember wouldn't be running with them kind of kids.
I think we should leave this place. Relax. I mean, it was a really bad idea.
Our friend's been shot. We need to get her to a hospital.
We can't get her to a hospital.
We have to try.
Best to put her out of her misery.
What the?
Sorry, kids. Gotta keep the forest clean.
If you want to see that with your own peepers, you can. You can go check out the trailer on the Punks in Pubs social site at Punks in Pubs. I was fortunate enough that I got to watch the movie before I interviewed Jenn, so I kind of had an idea of actually how much passion Jenn actually had for the punk genre. The movie is scattered with a great soundtrack that features bands such as Atomic Age, The Authorities, Black Lung, The Avengers, DayGlo Abortion and FANG, just to name a few, and producer Heather's love of the genre is about to come apparent from her first breath in this interview. Trust me, she's a big punk fan. So what can you expect from my natter? Of course we talk about the movie The Ranger, and I make the comparisons of being in a band to making a movie. We reveal what horror movies scared the living bejesus out of us and what actually scares us now. Jenn and Heather talk punk and discovery, and Chloe explains how discovering punk for the first time during this movie has led to her taking on the punk rock attitude into her real life. As well as all that, we talk about women being seen to create movies, and is being dubbed a B movie like being labelled a pop punk artist. I will explain how you can download and pre-order a copy of The Ranger at the end of our chat, and as always your band close out the show. This week is a band coming at you from the Mile High city of Denver. They're called The Lurchers and well worth sticking around for. But before that, there's this. This is episode 31 with the creators of The Ranger. I'll talk to you in a bit.
I'm filled with fucks.
New York City, Jersey area, yeah.
Are you also from Jersey then as well? Oh, okay, we'll talk about that. Okay. So we are in the edges of Soho. We're at the Royal George pub. FrightFest is still in full swing, and sat opposite me is director Jenn Wexler. If you say hello so people know your voice.
Hey, this is Jenn.
And then next to Jenn is Heather Buckley, producer. Heather, if you could say hello.
Hello, this is Heather Buckley.
There you go. Two voices, now you know who they are. So yeah, well done. I think you need to get kudos from the off. It seems to be that the movie's being received well. You were the first female director to open up FrightFest. It's only been 9 years going, so congratulations. Is it 9?
Years.
19 years, well, whatever it is. I mean, it's a bit too long, and for them to give themselves a pat on the back is a bit should you really be doing that? Also, you guys...
What's an interesting factoid is that I used to write for Fangoria magazine, and we were talking about at the beginning of the movement with one of the editors about why, the needing women filmmakers and voice works were important. And I go, hey, how many times has a woman filmmaker, like a woman's film, been on the cover of Fangoria, which was running much longer than FrightFest? And it was 3 times, and it was Mary Herron, of course, and Mary Lambert twice.
Wow.
For Pet Sematary 1 and 2.
Two
Yes.
women.
2 women.
In the entire run of Fangoria.
So those 2 people, for people who might not know who they are, can you explain who they are?
Mary Herron directed American Psycho, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And Mary Lambert directed Pet Sematary, which is also a fucking amazing movie.
And the sequel.
Which
has the great Clancy Brown crazy performance in it.
So the movie that you've directed is called The Ranger, and I was lucky enough that someone sent me a stream and I watched it the other night. Really enjoyed it. There's a part that made me chuckle so hard where someone blows into some batteries to try and make the walkie-talkie work.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I pissed myself on just that small little scene. It made me, I loved it. It made me chuckle.
Yeah.
How do you find this? How do you find coming to another country and basically doing these kind of interviews? Like, do you enjoy them, or are you like, fuck off, I just want to make my movie and then you just watch it? I don't want to do this sort of stuff.
I've watched The Ranger a bazillion times. I pretty much know The Ranger better than I've ever known anything in my entire life. There's nothing I'd rather do than talk about it. I'm having so much fun meeting people, talking to them. Like, it's, there's a ton of filmmakers here, so I'm seeing other movies, talking to them about their movies, hearing their thoughts on The Ranger. And I mean, we love film festivals. We love the horror community. There's nothing my favorite thing in the world is making movies. My second favorite thing in the world is going to film festivals and watching movies.
Part of these kind of films that there's an interesting conversation around being a female director, sort of the characterization of the final girl in the film, and I think even us, we find new layers about the film coming from just conversation, and also people who love the film as well.
Yeah.
And what's especially important, what I've seen, and I think I first saw when it premiered at South by Southwest, is that the amount of females, just civilians, who find the nuance and such hope and just love this movie so much for the nuance that's in there when it comes about female identity, and the fact that Jenn is a first-time, not filmmaker because she has an exquisite producing career, but a first-time director, and so many have run up to you and went, I think I could do it, I think some were crying, they were so moved that they saw that you made this movie.
Yeah, I mean, it's important to see people doing the things that you want to be doing. I don't really feel that I had enough female role models. I've had plenty of male mentors, and they've all been fucking amazing, and I love and am so grateful for everything that I've learned from them, but I haven't really had a female mentor before. There's just something nice in seeing diverse people telling stories.
Yeah.
Jenn and I would talk about her mentoring all the time. For me, it's no one has ever wanted to mentor me. She's like, oh, she could do it. Just this feels like she could produce this feature.
Yeah.
No problem. How's it going?
I mean, we're going to talk about how you ended up producing, because am I right in saying this is both your first times that you have Jenn directed and Heather produced?
A feature film.
So, I mean, how did you actively find yourself involved in the movie? And am I right in saying, Heather, that this is a movie that you co-wrote with I forgot the guy's name.
Yeah, so I went to school for screenwriting, and my classmate Jocko Farino wrote a version of The Ranger while we were in school together, and I just love the idea. I love the concept of punks going up against this park ranger, and we didn't know what to do with it at the time because we graduated and we had to learn how to be adults first and pay our rent and things like that. But eventually I started producing for Glass Eye Pix. I learned how to make movies, and I was thinking about what I wanted to direct for my first feature, and I remembered Jocko's script, so I called him and I asked him if he could find it and if we could work on it together, and if I could direct it, and he was super down. And then in terms of Heather coming on board, when we felt there was a draft there that I was really excited to share, Heather was one of the first people that I shared it with.
That is very true. And I was going to mention about your producing thing. It's not only Jenn's not sort of just a nuts and bolts producer, you're a creative producer as well. Mm-hmm. Is that you collaborated very closely with the filmmakers that you worked with, which is important to know. What happened is that how I came to producing is that it was a fine artist first, I went to University Arts where this script was written.
Yeah, we graduated different years, but we both went to the same school.
Including Jocko, which is very strange. So we all went to Philadelphia. I did design. I did I was a creative director, creative lead in advertising for 13 years in Manhattan, running cross-disciplinary teams, dealing with, pitching the clients and doing agency of record stuff. On top of that, I would write for Fangoria and Dread Central with a lot of focus on interviewing. And I would just go to film fests, and I started meeting people like Jenn and Larry, and, I would go to work with like Ted Kagan and things like that. And then at some point, it's like people would hear about what I did in my day job, and they were like, oh my God, you should really think about producing films. And I heard it a couple of times when I made We Are Still Here, and also from, I would consider the last person that sort of pushed me over the edge was John Fasano, who was the director of Rock and Roll Nightmare, saying it's like, you need to leave advertising behind. And you need to work in film, because it was never a trajectory to me. I could never dream where we sort of are today. And Jenn gave me the script 3 years ago just to check it out because we were friends.
Yeah.
So I was just checking it out, and I just thought, like, here's what I thought the audience would be. Just, writing for that audience, being a part of that audience, and also having, like, the segmentation background, what sort of the music might sound like, because it's different than the type of music that I usually go to in punk rock. And I used to send her like JPEGs on Tumblr and like crazy 80s stuff, like just because I was thinking it's like, oh, like Jenn wants to make her film, I want her to make her film, this is her dream. Here, I'm thinking about you making your film, I'm thinking about your cool project, and here is some music. And then I had this ability through our mutual friend Kim Garland, because I was always curious, because again, this obsession, it's like, Heather, you should really be a producer. And so it's like, Jenn, do you mind if I pitch this to an investor? Again, never like wanting to work on the film, just like wanting to have Jenn's movie made. And at some point I wound up as producer on the project. That's actually how that happened. But I guess it's like almost like with Jenn's story too, is that first time director but not first time filmmaker. So like first time like running a multidisciplinary like creative project. It's not my first time doing it. I also have like 150 credits being a DVD bonus feature producer. It's like when we were on stage, it's like, what project are you working on now? It's like, I produced the Candyman Discararo. Like, I scoped it all and shot it all. I do all that stuff, The Thing This, Exorcist 3. That's what I do during my day job.
People who are going to be listening to this are not necessarily going to be horror movie buffs or movie buffs at all. They're going to listen to it because they're interested in punk. And we're going to talk about the soundtrack in a sec. But
really? Every one of my punk rock friends all watch horror movies.
I mean, that's a large generalization.
Yes. I was very shocked when I went to CBGB's for the first time, and I went, "Oh, you guys like horror movies too?" Yeah. It was shocking.
I mean, but there is that link between horror and punk. I mean, the first horror film that comes into my hand when I talk about that genre is probably Idle Hands for me from when I was younger.
I love Idle Hands.
So that was kind of like, there was a big punk feel to that. And Killer Driller, is that another one whereabouts the neighbor was pissed off because the band next door were a punk band?
Oh yeah, that's Able for...
Oh, I think you're specifically talking about punk rock. For me, it's like a lot of my friends identify with the a lot of the villains in the film, which is one reason why I wanted to make sure the Ranger came to life.
Okay.
Is that there's sort of like this anti-hero thing, because who are the enemies of Jason Voorhees? Like cheerleaders, the establishment.
Yeah.
The beautiful people that he's mauling down, cops. There's a lot in common.
Getting back to the question though, I mean, how do you gain funding for these kind of things? Because obviously it's an idea and then it needs to become something.
Yeah.
I mean, when was this first script written, and how long is it taking for you to get to the point where actually you're now showing it at festivals?
Yeah, so from the time, because my feeling is that the longest part of the process is when you're writing the script. At least that's the way that it is for me. So, from the time that I called Jocko and was like, can we work on it? Maybe that was 2014. And we felt that we had an actual script we were ready to share in 2016. We weren't working on the script, that whole time. We had jobs and it was our little side project. We'd work on it on weekends and things like that. When we finally got serious and we were like, okay, we have our script. This is The Ranger. That was March 2016. We raised our financing over the course of the following year. We shot in spring 2017, and then we premiered at South by Southwest in March 2018. So it was like a 2-year process.
Yeah.
And I also just want to add that once you have your financing in the bank, it goes really fast. We probably had our, Money in the Bank in March 2017. And then, like I said, we were at South by March 2018. So the actual making of the movie happened in a year. And before that, it was the writing and the financing part of it.
I mean, it is kind of the same as being in a band, I think, making a movie, in the sense of you're constantly trying to push an audience to positively being engaged. And sometimes you don't get the reaction that you want, but it's the motivation of trying to keep going and try and get better and improve. Have you had those kind of stumbling blocks whereabouts you've gone, this movie's just not going to get made, like, we need to move on?
There's certainly the feelings of like, oh my God, is this movie ever going to get made? But I feel like with some things, you just can't let them go. Even if I'm that person that for 5 years, 10 years, I'm still trying to make like, I could not just like put this project in a cabinet and say goodbye to it.
Because here you go. Everybody has a lot of great scripts in the world, and the way that I look at it, because I, as I mentioned, like I'm very engaged in the horror community and know what's going on and have a marketing background. When I read Jenn and Jocko's work, I had no doubt in the world that it was going to get made. Because it was like, now is the time for the female filmmaker, right? Because here's the thing, like, how do you pitch to investors? So you can have the best script in the world, but like, what is the angle? What are the different things about it that you could put together to make sure it's successful so it's going to find its audience? It's like, do you know the audience? So you have the script, do you know the audience of this film? So I think it's a little bit opposite of what you're saying. It's like, so the segmentation of the audience is like horror, punk rockers, girl power. We wrote that all off. It's like there's a space in the market for this, a hunger in the market for this, and it's also like these other things that were very successful and became cult classics, like Class of 1984, Return of the Living Dead. So there's already like an idiom that exists in the marketplace, and the idea that it was Glass Eye Pix. Glass Eye Pix is very beloved in the community. Jenn has worked on phenomenal stuff. I mean, the last thing that Jenn worked on was the movie Most Beautiful Island, which won Grand Jury Prize at South by Southwest. So the idea, it's like you're trying to like do a sure shot to an investor. You can't promise them that, but these are things that I consider it's less of a risk, right? And then we have Andrew Van Houten, Hood River, who did The Woman, Girl Next Door, really great films, things that were theatrical. Well, he's going to come on board too with the film. That's part of the pitch of what I talk to investors about. But I never felt that this movie wasn't going to get made. It's like, because we would do anything on earth. You have to do it as if your life depends on it. Do you have to pursue getting these projects done? Because you have to feel like you would literally die if it doesn't get done at any price point. And so that's what we did. So when I get a script, you could actually sort of feel this can get made, because there's a future where you see the audience and what are the collaboration combinations that's going to help you get funding and make the project more attractive, because you're trying to find a situation that's not risk. That doesn't mean you're making like a movie that's not fucking cool. It's just the idea is that you know the audience and you know filmmaking, and you can discuss that with someone who's going to write a check.
Get away from the movie a little bit and kind of understand you guys a little bit more. Heavy, you spoke briefly about Sex Pistols kind of entering your life and you realizing, holy fuck, like that music really speaks to me. Was that the first band that you heard of, like, that would be genre of punk? And if so, why the Sex Pistols? Why was it them?
So on the soundtrack of Fear No Evil, because I was a huge horror fan, there was Sex Pistols, Ramones, Suicide, Rosillos. I think it's an unspoken about punk rock soundtrack in movies because I think everyone gravitates towards Return of the Living Dead, which is not necessarily reflective of the scene of the time. It had a lot of music in it. I would, and a lot of my friends have similar stories, is that when I was young, I would see people that looked punk and I didn't know what it was. I would read in a lot of high fashion magazines, you know, just waiting at like the ShopRite with my mother, and I would be fascinated in these corseted looks, this crazy hair, this makeup, and the drama of it, because the whole world was sort of like a beige dustbin, and within this world were these such inspirational, interesting people, and I never knew what it was. And I started like wearing sort of strange things, and my cousin said, why don't you go to Vintage Vinyl in Ford's, New Jersey, because people are dressed like you in front of it. And I used to just, because again, there was no radio station, there was just watching that movie, and it was like it was in 1988. And I think it was the first punk band that I listened to was the Ramones, because it's the track that played before Anarchy in the UK. And both of those songs, I went to my friend, and I said, what is this music? Like, I didn't even know what it was. And she made me a mixtape, which I still have today, which had a lot of great stuff on it. And from that era, I would, again, like, go to Vintage Vinyl. I would look at logos. I would go in the punk section. But I also used to, because, like, I was, you know, a middle-class kid with not a lot of money, I would go into the city to go to shows, to go to Coney Island High and CBGB's, and see all the bands play live. Because for $12, you could see like everyone live and decide what sort of music that you liked. And over and over again, it's like the lineups of the New York City shows would be like street punk, hardcore, and ska. And that's sort of like the trifecta that you would see over and over again at New York City shows. And again, a lot of English bands would play, like Stiff Little Fingers and Menace and Angelic Upstarts, and I love that sound, but I cannot define why, and I still talk about this in my elderly old age, of why, because it's not something that inspired me. It's something that literally is me and felt like how I feel on the inside. Sort of that sort of incredible, intense energy. And when I sit at the bar with my friends, I have like, you know, friends from different countercultures like psychobilly, rockabilly, at places like Otto's Shrunken Head and Double Down in Manhattan, and I go, after all these years, I still respond to this music the same. And I also still continue to look this way. My look has evolved. This is probably the ultimate form of Heather Buckley, which is like, you know, with the bihawk and very sort of like Mad Match Butch kind of looking. But it's just, I can't explain why it was so important. I actually thought I was goth before. I thought I was punk because there was a magazine called Propaganda Magazine, and they looked beautiful. So I had like old pictures from the Batcave in London, and then I listened to Christian Death, and I go, God, I hate this music. And so I knew I wasn't goth, but yeah, it's always punk rock, and it's specifically that kind of punk rock, which is a lot of like bass driven, anthem-y, like Toy Dolls, Attic sort of stuff.
Go for it, Heather. Beat that. How did punk introduce itself into you? Like, was there like a family member who introduced it to you, or was it like the same through a movie? Yeah, no, I actually don't remember how I ended up at my first punk show. I guess a friend or something was like, oh, come out to this thing. It was a show in like a church basement and in New Jersey where I grew up. And, you know, I grew up in the suburbs. Life was, what did you say? Dusty? Anyway, it was beige.
Beige,
yeah.
Dustbin. I was
Dustbin.
referencing Flowers in the Dustbin from Sex Pistols.
Okay, so it was also beige in the town that I grew up in, which I actually don't think was that far away from where the town Heather probably grew up in New Jersey. But anyway, going to shows as a teenager, I started to discover like, oh, there is this world where you can go and you can throw your body around and listen to this music and like feel this like primal thing. And it was just so perfect for me discovering myself as a teenager and discovering that you didn't have to just fit into the suburban box that the rest of your life wanted you to fit into. And this was also the exact same time I was discovering horror movies. So I deeply threw myself into horror, watching horror movies constantly and going to shows at the same time. You know, going to high school every day was a total drag and I hated it, but those are the things that got me through it.
Did you feel that like your punk rock friends liked horror movies too?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, 1,000%.
They all did. I was going like, so you have this gear and you have like this music I love and everyone loves horror movies.
Yeah. Although I have to say that my discovering of horror was, I felt more of a solo experience. It was literally me just, you know, going to the video store, getting movies, and then just diving into them by myself and feeling like I was like, it was like the ultimate rebellion. Like my parents didn't know what I was watching. I was like in the room by myself, just seeing these images unfold. And it same thing with going to shows and like throwing my body around. And we recently got invited to the Warped Tour, which was like 14-year-old Jenn would have been so excited to learn that someday I would be on the list to get into Warped Tour. So I brought Chloe with me and we went, and I was like, I used to be right there, and I don't know, it was such a thrill, like being in the crowd.
And Chloe, how did you find the Warped Tour? Did you enjoy it? Did you even get involved? Did you go in there elbows out?
No, I didn't. I'm too much of a scaredy cat to have gotten involved, but I don't know, it was cool to watch. And yeah, Warped Tour was pretty rad. It was a thing when I was growing up too, and I was like never cool enough really to like go with my friends. So
I got to introduce her to. I think it might be its last year. That's what someone was saying.
I think it's no longer a touring circuit. I think now it's going to be one place and that's it.
Okay, it feels like kind of. I don't know, like I feel some weird sense of closure. This thing I used to go to all the time when I was younger, and then I went again maybe a couple weeks ago, 3 weeks ago.
They waited for you,
yeah.
And then they were like, done.
Yeah, thanks, Warped Tour.
I was going to say what's interesting because of Jenn's experience, because as we know that punk is local and regional. So Jenn was from more North Jersey than I was from, and so there were probably... In central Jersey, where I spent most of my time, there were sort of no basement shows. There wasn't a great access to New York City, so I did that later in my life when I was in college. But if you were from North Jersey, there seemed to be more punk rockers and more sort of basement shows or availability to see shows when you were in sort of like North Jersey or Northwest Jersey. So I didn't start to go to see shows. Like I went to a few shows when I was younger, but I was mostly like an outsider Travis Bickle shut-in. But when I went to college in Philadelphia, that's when I would go to see a lot more shows, and then after that spent a lot of time at the big venues there, and most of them are closed down. Because I was walking around with some OG punk guy, and he was like talking about how sad like London has changed, and I said I could do the same tour on St. Mark's about everything closing down. So I used to go to like Tramps, the Continental, Irving Plaza, Roseland, Coney Island High, and the Cyclone Room, and CBGB's. And I think that's sort of like, in the Wetlands. And the only thing that's open is Irving Plaza. And then we go see stuff at the Ballery Electric, but everything else is gone. I don't even walk past where CBGB's used to
Well,
be.
right there, with that building site right in front of us, that used to be the Astoria, and that used to be a world-famous London venue, and it's been closed down now because we're doing a cross-rail across London, and that's the thing that went. It's for me, that venue was probably my second home. Like, I loved it. So it's weird that now my friend's got a bar here, and you just look out, it's like a fucking graveyard. But I mean, the problem with London though is that rent prices have gone up so much, and venues can't afford. Right? Yeah, exactly. I mean, we're lucky enough that the 100 Club is still going on Oxford Street. That's still there, but even that is under threat because rent is just ridiculous. Like
and that no one could save CBGB's because they had a lot of back rent. I had a lot of friends that worked there, and they squatted to try to keep it open to see if anyone would come in the last second to bring money. But it was I believe it was the BRC that finally closed it down.
Yeah.
Now it's like a high fashion store on the Ballery. But again, I don't try to go next to it. I don't try to look at it.
I did see a little controversy though that there's like a store that did a front that had CBGB's kind of style.
Oh my God, that's at like Newark Airport. They have the CBGB's restaurant.
That's
I think.
it. Yeah.
It's They can
Nothing more
market
punk
it.
rock than.
But I always feel that folks want to have that feeling of that rebellion and freaks. A lot of it's almost something.
I want to rebel when I'm at the airport. Fuck the airport.
Well, I think it's something that Chloe said. Like, people will come up to me because of the way that I dress, and I always think it's sweet. And even like little old ladies, and I go like, why don't you look like this? And a lot of them are just afraid to just be who the fuck they are. And it's like, no, do it.
We spoke about it briefly, is about the soundtrack of the movie. It's phenomenal. Clearly, that's come from your love of the music and the genre of punk. So can you kind of explain a little bit about that and why these bands, also playing music can be quite expensive. So especially if you're an independent movie, did you go to the bands directly? How did that work? How did you end up getting the licensing to be able to use this music?
So I really wanted the music of the movie to feel like a mixtape. I wanted the audience to feel like they were to have that nostalgic feeling of playing a new mixtape for the first time and discovering new bands on it, and also hearing some bands that they've heard before on it.
Yep.
And that's why on the soundtrack there's a mix of bands from the 80s, but there's also some modern bands in there also. And then in terms of the movie, I really wanted to be like when the punks are in control, their music is dominating the soundtrack, and as they start to lose control, the Rangers' choice of music starts to take over the movie. We worked with the music supervisor, Mida Goodwin, who was a band promoter in the 80s, so he was tight with all of these bands, and pretty much the way that it worked is he reached out to these bands, he told them about the Ranger, he got them on board, and then he came back to me and kind of presented me with these bands and said, these guys have all agreed to be part of it, so if you choose songs that are on these albums, these are the ones that they have the rights to, we could make this happen. So then I spent time, I had my cut and I had all these songs, and I just spent time listening to them in thematic ways and figuring out what made the most sense thematically throughout the movie. And Heather was super involved in working with Mida on that and in getting the punk community involved, especially Rotten UK, which is our band that plays in the opening warehouse party scene.
Oh, is that okay? Yep.
Yeah, so Mida Goodwin came to us via my friend Stacy, and Jen's friend Stacy runs Etheria, which is a female focused genre film fest in LA. And it's true that Mida is the OG and reached out to a lot of the folks that were involved. When I originally read the script, since I am from the New York City scene, we all listen to New York hardcore in general, from like Detroit, DC, and stuff like that. But we listen to street punk, specifically obsessed with English street punk, and that sound is a much more heavier sound. Well, this movie would be a bit more like giddy and fun. That I felt sort of it needed the feeling of in California, which is sort of like this thrash skate punk.
Yeah.
And the legend is which is actually a true legend, is that I emailed Stacy and I go, Stacy, do you know any bands that sound like the Avengers and like 7 Seconds? And I gave her this whole list, and she goes, Heather, what if I told you like I could get you something better? Not only like bands that are like this, but someone who knows every one of these bands. And that's when we were put in touch with Mida, and it was a long process to again like go to all the bands directly, figure out what they owned, and sort of do a deal directly with it.
Yeah.
They also knew it was important. Being a part of the Ranger is awesome, but the idea of being part of such a wonderful pop culture movie, but then also leaving behind the soundtrack for people to find. Because a lot of times, in New Jersey, I was watching a movie, Fear No Evil, when I was 13 years old, and I heard Anarchy in the UK, and I went, oh my God, this sounds like me. There is no way that I would have been able to listen to punk rock during that time period in New Jersey if it was not in a horror movie.
Yeah.
So in that, I think Jenn has created a film that would be a touchstone for horror fans, people who fucking love slasher films, Final Girls, Pink-Haired Girls, but also to leave that soundtrack behind for people to find those bands and find themselves. We were recently at IFC Center for a theatrical run. The actor that played Abe Bubba was saying he even missed his gear that he had on. There's something about that.
Chloe's over there, and I don't know if she minds having a quick chat as well. Just because, for you as an actor, how did you find the idea of punk rock? Was it something that was alien to you, or was it something that you enjoyed, or was it something that you kind of got yourself really into, and now are you purposely looking at other punk bands and going, actually, I quite enjoy that?
Well, I didn't know anything about punk in the beginning, and Jenn made me a mix, and I sort of tried to immerse myself, and also just Heather would pick me up and take me to set a lot, and so we would listen to a lot of punk stuff in her car on the way to set. And now I discovered a lot of bands that I really still love, and I hope that I picked up things from Chelsea and just the punk aesthetic that have made it into my actual life, just the not giving a fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're fake. I see you right through you. Nobody else seems to think it's true. You're fake. You take what you can get. Keep people close, step on their necks. You don't believe in nothing. You don't see nothing that you do could be ever wrong. You don't feel nothing. Treat everyone like they're nothing at all. There's something you don't know. About time that you found it out. You can kick, you can scream, you can shout. You're a small man, such a small man. There's something you don't know. About time that you found it out. Just shit your scum, your face. Wash the blood off your hands. Bury the past, covered up with sand. Douse the dry of the gasoline. Set fire to the future, ignore the screams. Nihilism's one thing, but if you come for something, you don't make no sense to me. You preach understanding, your ass smells hate. You're a snake oil salesman, you're fucking fake. C-O-U-N-T-I-F-E-I-T. It's what you are.
It was set in the 80s, so why was it punk? Why was it the vision of punk that you wanted as your protagonist? Why were it them? Why not New Romantic, for instance?
So truthfully, the concept came before any of it. It was always punks versus park ranger. So there was never any question is it a group of goth kids or hippies or whatever. That was never what the movie was. And I think that baked into the idea of punks versus park ranger, there's just this, rebellion versus authority. At the same time, something that was very intriguing to me was, while they're total polar opposites, of course, in the movie, the ranger has his own code of conduct that he lives by, and the punks have their code of conduct that they live by, and they have their uniforms, and they have the rules of their worlds. And then in the middle of all of that, you have the character of Chelsea, who is kind of caught in between those two worlds, and really she just wants to shed all of it and be herself and figure out who she truly is at her core. And I think that when you're in the punk scene, I know for myself, I used it as a way of trying to figure out who I was. You're in this world where people are, there's an embracing of individuality in that world, and I think that's why a lot of people are drawn to it. But even then, you have these things you're trying to live up to. So for me, it was a great place to discover myself, but to really find myself, I had to just shut it all out.
Punk for myself and my friends is that it's the honor and loyalty of the people that I've known for most of my life is important to me. When we talk about the importance of codes, standing by each other and always being a family and being there for each other radically more than what I would consider civilians would be. and this deep closeness because you share the same sort of, I don't know, like code, but also moral grounding on how the world is, because it's a paradoxical world, because it's both hopeful and apocalyptic. It's both funny and then it's like super hardcore, and I always feel that they're sort of like the rebel and the jester simultaneously. So to me, that it's incredibly absurd, and you'll find crazy burnouts, but you also find a lot of the folks that I hang out with, it's like they love music, they're artists and musicians, and they read existentialism in books, and they're all artists, but they're artists in a way that they have the feeling of the outsider. And there's one thing of feeling like an outsider, and there's another thing of sort of like adorning yourself with the trappings of that. I almost feel, because of the generation that I'm from, it's like in the practice of punk, because it was created by people who are in their 60s and sort of evolved from their in their 50s. So now sort of we're carrying on a certain thing. I mean, it's hard to know. It's hard to know why when I go up to people on the streets who look like me that we're so similar.
It is a community.
It's like a species of human being.
It's
the punk rocker.
I always talk about whenever I'm at a show. If you're in a pit, there is, like you said, there's like code. If someone falls down, you help them right back up. If something's kicking off, you try and come to reason or take it outside. There is that.
No cops.
No cops is a big one, because, like you said, a lot of punks are outsiders, and they've grown up in an environment whereabouts they probably felt like they couldn't be themselves. So when they're in an environment whereabouts they can be themselves, it's 100 times there because they know they're safe, and it's that safe environment of knowing that I can look like this, I can act like this, I can sound like this. It's allowing to be, whereabouts I think a lot of the time they're not allowed to be.
I was always like this, but there's a backlash for pursuing individuality, intellectualism, and art. Specifically if you're growing up in certain environments, in a certain class, and a certain parents.
No, I love the way that you just said that, like allowing one to be, because that is actually, for me, like the core. I mean, look, it's kind of like a joke. Like, what is punk? What's the definition of punk? I mean,
I always say fuck you is the definition of punk.
Fuck you is the definition of punk. But allowing yourself to be you, like deep down, it sounds like a little tacky when you say it like that, but a little after school special. But actually, like, being yourself is
the more you know, and then we get the little rainbow.
Yeah.
Something I enjoyed throughout your movie is the fact you're trying to come up with punk names. What were rejected? I don't want to talk about the bands that were spoken about in the movie, because I want people to see the movie, but what were the bands' names that were rejected and you went, nah, we can't have that?
Well, first of all, I really wanted to include that because that's just like fucking every conversation I had when I was young was, oh, and this glass of water, there's a glass of water on the table, that's why I just said that. But that's my new band name. I mean, it just became like and it's not, everybody does that. The only things that we rejected were ones that we Googled and we were like, oh, that's actually a band, we can't use that one.
Very funny story when we were doing the behind the scenes stuff. Again, a Bubba story. And then he goes, it's like, so he asked everybody what would be their fake.
Sorry, Bubba, who plays Abe in the movie, yes. One of the punks.
One of the punks, yes. So that we asked everyone, we interviewed everyone, like, what would be like your fake punk band name, and I love that he said Discharge. It's amazing. They're the legendary fucking punk band. Best and most correct answer.
Are you a big Discharge fan then?
That's what's on my back patch, yeah.
This is great audio, by the way, for everyone who cannot see that.
She just turned around, and the back of my battle vest is a giant Discharge patch with studs.
I don't know if this is true, but the term B-movie horror, how do you find that? Is that like the punk version of pop punk? Because it can be seen as quite a derogatory term, like as in, you're still a horror movie. Why is it a B-movie horror movie?
I think the term B-movie is something, for me, I wanted to aspire to making a B-movie. I think The Ranger if somebody calls The Ranger a B-movie, I'm so happy with that. I feel like it's part of the great tradition of, schlocky cabin in the woods movies. I'm so happy to have that. But I think now we live in a world where people throw around the term elevated genre a lot, and you have drama movies with genre elements, and they're great, and I love them, and we make them at Glass Eye Picks, and I'm a total fan of movies like that. But The Ranger was never intended to be that. The Ranger was definitely meant to be a movie in the grand tradition of blood and guts.
So this is the question for all three of you then. Like, I feel for everyone growing up, there's a certain point where you watch a horror movie and you go, oh, I probably shouldn't have watched it, I was too young. And it's kind of reflected back to you at some point, whether you've gone to like Blockbuster, if you remember what they are, people listening, and like you see the video covers and you go, ooh, I don't want this. Like, is there any movie that you particularly remember where you were younger? Because with me, it was Basket Case. I can remember watching Basket Case with my older brother, and I was thinking, what the fuck am I watching this for? I'm gonna cry myself to sleep.
Yeah.
Like, what movie it was for you guys, all three of you?
Well, first of all, when I was a kid, I used to love walking up and down the aisles of the video store and just taking in all of the posters, and my imagination like just ran wild at what the fuck were these movies. And then I would like look across the video store to make sure my parents didn't know I was in the horror movie aisle, and then I was like, okay, they're busy over there, and I would go back to it. But for me, I have that exact memory. When I was a kid, I was 7 years old, and there was like a family gathering, and there were people in another room watching something, and I went into the room and I saw on the screen the most horrible looking twin girls. They're dead, ghostly, and it was so fucking scary, and I was like, what is this? I never want to watch this again in my life. And of course I've seen The Shining a zillion times now, but at that time I was like, I can never watch another moment of this ever.
The phenomenon that Jen is talking about, which I think I've discussed on social media, is when you discover horror movies via free-range horror. That means that you're walking into the den. Like, for example, my father, my earliest experience of being horrified was on the Disney Channel watching the squid in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. I was horrified. Then I was horrified with my father watching Poltergeist and the guy peeling off his face and having such, like, and as like a little girl in elementary school being so freaked out and like having anxiety, but also in the back of my head, because I was incredibly scared of horror films, like wanting to see it again. And then The Fly. The sequence when they turned out. But yeah, like just having your dad or families with little kids around, it's like, let's just watch The Fly and traumatize my children. But it's like the extension of that is like actually renting and watching a film when I was like old enough to like look in my books. I should have never watched Clockwork Orange or Wild at Heart at the age of 13. I think way too early for something that intense and has such an extenuated rape sequence. I just wouldn't.
I have a very similar experience to Jen. I was at a family gathering. I wandered in, I'm the youngest in my family. I was like 6. I wandered into a room with my older cousins who were watching Tim Curry. And it was this scene where the bully gets like dragged in to the pipe in the sewer. And I had no idea what I was watching, but that image was burned into my brain for so long. And I didn't even know what it was from. And then when I was a teenager, I watched it again, and there was like this whole cathartic thing, but terrified. It's just absolutely terrified.
The Tim Curry hit is scary. Like, it's so scary. I was at a Halloween party the other day, obviously last Halloween, and I just saw the red balloons. Someone came in with red balloons. I saw the balloons first, and instantly I was like, what the fuck? Like, instantly, like, shivers. Yeah, it was horrible.
How I want it, your body on the floor, a Kodak moment, you're a waste of air, in a waste of space, I won't shout, I'll taste the fly into your face, I hate you now, more than I ever did, I wanna kill you, dig you up and do it again, I wanna come to run over your head, put it in reverse and do it again, and I would be lying.
So talking about like movies now to the what was deemed in this country video nasties, is there that idea now that when people watch the Cannibal Holocaust or Evil Dead, it can be perceived as, I don't want to say comedic, but it's not seen as scary anymore? Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we've built up this intolerance? And what now has to happen to make us scared? I mean, what was the last movie that you watched that was in the past 5 years that really like scared the shit out of you?
Hereditary.
I haven't watched that. So
Hereditary is so scary. I'm not going to give away spoilers, but I feel like I have a really high tolerance for horror movies. I watch a lot of horror movies. It's been a long time since a horror movie has freaked me out so much and stayed with me, like after I've left the theater. And this movie, for at least like 5 days after I saw the movie, I was still visualizing shots from the movie and freaking myself out about them. So Hereditary is, besides Hereditary, it's been a lot. I don't even know if I can think of one that's scared me recently.
I agree with Hereditary. Didn't we both watch that at Overlook?
No, I didn't. I saw it after that.
You saw it after that. So I was able to see it at Overlook Film Fest in New Orleans, and all I ever heard, because I tried to get into it at South by Southwest and it sold out, and I was so disappointed in my heart over that, and all I ever heard was just, this movie's incredibly scary. To go back to your question about why people laugh at it, I think because there's a lack of empathy and people want to be above the material. And that is exactly why. And if they don't want to engage with it, it's the same thing like when I would go through a haunted house and like tough guys would go like, you're not going to scare me. That's just makeup. It's like, if you're going to take that fucking attitude, you don't deserve to watch Cannibal Holocaust or Serbian film or any of the extreme stuff that's out there. Because I feel if you watch with it with empathy and if you allow the films to sort of, envelop you, even the things that like, the Ed Wood films, there's some sort of like strange sort of quality to what you're looking at. This dreamland quality. That's 100% right. I know Larry always jokes about that.
And so, what's the next step then for the Ranger? So you're doing festivals now. When you're here, do you approach independent cinemas and then you get a distribution deal with that? And also, how can people start looking for it and start buying it? Like, is it going to go on iTunes? How's it working?
So right now we're doing a theatrical in New York and LA. We're going to be announcing our streaming news very soon. But in addition to our theatrical, we're also like playing film festivals everywhere in the world. It feels like, all thanks to Heather and our festival booker, Joe Yannick.
Joe Yannick's fucking awesome. And so what I think we decided with this film, the reason it's doing a huge film fest run, is that it's a punk rock film, so it should go on tour. And the type of film it is, that it's a sort of a fun slasher film, that it belongs to all the horror fans on Earth. I went to this film fest a while ago called Night Visions in Finland. It's a Helsinki genre film fest, and that's like an underrepresented market. And to see the sort of hardcore love for horror in an underrepresented market made me believe that this movie, or like movies similar to it, need to go to everyone. People contact me on social media and they go, it's like, can this play in my state? Can this play in my country? I said, if you find me a screen and someone who wants to play it, I will send it directly to our booker. We have people, some of the stuff that we passed out at FrightFest, it's like some fans made flyers, and then we've posted them on Twitter, and FrightFest has like retweeted them. So there's been that. There's been a little bit of fan art. My friend Mel made like vomit bags during the screening, like handwriting all of them. So it's been great fun. But I would look for it, to come out soon. And then also the soundtrack, we're looking at another merchandise sort of stuff. But if anyone out there needs to see it, it's like if they could find me a theater manager that wants to play it, I just kick them over to Joe. And it's like, well, let's make a deal. And you guys can play it, like book some punk bands for an after show and enjoy it and have fun, because this movie's for everyone.
Perfect. Well, Chloe, Jen, and Hen, thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
A chill runs up your spine, crawls into your brain. A freezing touch of fear is driving me insane. Although you try to fight, drag from the silence where you hide till you scream.
Thanks to Jen, Heather, and Chloe for their time. If you're interested in watching the movie, if you're based in the US, you can rent and stream the movie via Redbox. The rest of us can pick it up on Blu-ray/DVD on Amazon, and the movie will be made available soon on the horror streaming service Shudder. All that information is up on the Punks in Pubs socials. Now time for me to say, rate and review the podcast, go pick up a t-shirt, and again, follow the podcast on social media at Punks in Pubs. Right, time to end the podcast. Thank you to Stephen Burke, thank you to you for listening, and thank you to the band about to play out the show. They're called The Lurchers, they're from Denver, Colorado, where it's always 420, and this track is called My Own Eyes. Punks in Pubs will be having February off, so we will be back on the 3rd of March with Tom May of the Menzingers. Until then, if you're going to a punk show and you see someone fall down, you pick them right back up. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Was that mic cutting out?